Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the starship Terra's Pride, watching the alien world grow larger on the main screen. 3 years of space travel had brought them to this moment. Earth's first diplomatic mission to another intelligent species was about to begin. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface," said Ryan Blake from his communications station. The young officer's voice carried a mix of excitement and nervousness that Jake understood well. They were all feeling it. "Put it through, Ryan." The screen flickered and showed a tall, blue-skinned alien with 4 arms and sharp, angular features. The creature wore what looked like ceremonial armor covered in strange symbols. When it spoke, the universal translator made its words sound oddly formal. "Human vessel, I am War Chiefess Valandra of the Zephyrian High Council. You will land. At the coordinates I am sending, be prepared for the testing." The transmission ended abruptly. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. Dr. Lisa Carter, their xenobiologist, was frowning at her datapad. Amanda Torres, the security chief, had her hand resting on her weapon. Pete Collins, the engineer, was checking system readings while trying to look calm. "Dr. Carter, what do you know about this testing they mentioned?" Jake asked. Lisa looked up from her notes. "The Zephyrians are a warrior culture, Captain. Everything I've learned about them suggests they don't respect weakness. They believe that pain and struggle make a person strong." "What kind of testing are we talking about?" "I'm not sure, but their history shows they settled disputes through combat. Single combat with bladed weapons." Lisa's voice was steady, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes. "They think species that avoid pain are not worth knowing," Jake nodded slowly. Earth had spent decades preparing for this moment. Humanity's application to join the Galactic Federation depended on getting approval from at least 3 member species. The Zephyrians were known as fierce warriors, but they were also fair judges of character. If humans could prove themselves worthy, the Zephyrians would support their application. "Amanda, what's our military assessment of their capabilities?" The security chief pulled up a holographic display. "They're strong, Captain. Faster than humans, and they've been fighting with energy blades for thousands of years. They're warriors trained from childhood." She paused. "But they have rules. Honor codes. They don't use dirty tricks or advanced weapons in single combat." Jake walked to the front of the bridge and looked at the alien planet below. Strange purple clouds swirled around continents of red rock and silver cities. Somewhere down there, decisions would be made that would determine humanity's future among the stars. "All right, people. We knew this wouldn't be easy. Prep the shuttle. We're going down there to meet them face to face." An hour later, Jake led a small team down to the planet's surface. The shuttle landed in a large courtyard surrounded by towering stone buildings. Hundreds of Zephyrians had gathered to watch the humans arrive. They were all tall and blue-skinned like Valandra, but Jake noticed that many carried weapons openly. Energy blades hung from their belts, glowing softly with inner light. Valandra approached them as they left the shuttle. Up close, she was even more impressive. Nearly 7 feet tall with muscles that showed even through her armor. Her 4 arms moved with practiced grace, and her dark eyes studied the humans carefully. "So," she said in heavily accented English, "these are the humans who wish to join the Great Federation." "I am Captain Jake Morrison, representing Earth and humanity," Jake replied formally. "We come seeking friendship and alliance with the Zephyrian." "People," Valandra made a sound that might have been laughter. "Friendship must be earned, human. Your species is unknown to us. We have heard you are weak, that you fear pain and avoid conflict." Dr. Carter stepped forward slightly. "We prefer to solve problems through discussion and cooperation, but humans are not afraid of conflict when it becomes necessary." "Words," Valandra said dismissively. "Any creature can make words. We judge by actions." She gestured to the crowd around them. "My people have gathered to witness your testing. Will you prove that humans deserve respect, or will you show us that the rumors are true?" Jake felt the weight of the moment. Everything humanity had worked for came down to this. "What kind of test?" "Single combat. You and I will fight with energy blades in the traditional way." If you show courage and strength, the Zephyrian Council will consider supporting your application to the Federation. If you show weakness... She left the sentence unfinished. Amanda Torres moved closer to Jake. Captain, maybe I should... No, Jake said quietly. This is something I have to do myself. He looked back at Valandra. I accept your challenge. The War Chiefess smiled, showing sharp teeth. Good, come. They walked through the courtyard to a large circular arena carved from black stone. Thousands of Zephyrians filled the seats around the fighting area. Jake had never seen so many aliens in one place. Their blue skin seemed to shimmer in the strange light of their sun, and their forearms moved in ways that looked almost like a dance dot. In the center of the arena, two pedestals held energy blades. The weapons were beautiful and deadly, with curved handles and beams of pure energy that hummed with power. Jake had trained with similar weapons during his military service, but never in a fight where his life and his species' future were at stake. The rules are simple, Valandra announced, her voice carrying clearly through the arena. We fight until one of us yields or cannot continue. The blade must draw blood from the chest, near the heart, to prove the warrior's courage. Most species surrender after the first cut. She picked up one of the energy blades and activated it. The weapon came alive with blue-white energy that cast dancing shadows on the arena floor. Jake took the other blade and felt its weight in his hands. It was heavier than he expected, but balanced perfectly. Are you ready, human? Valandra asked. Jake looked up at the thousands of alien faces watching him. In the VIP section he could see his crew. Lisa Carter was taking notes even now, studying everything for her reports. Ryan Blake looked nervous but determined. Amanda Torres had her arms crossed and was watching every move Valandra made, probably planning how she would handle the fight differently. Behind them sat members of the Zephyrian Council, including the Elder War Chief Mortandus. These were the beings who would decide humanity's fate based on how well Jake performed in the next few minutes. He thought about Earth, about the billions of people who were counting on this mission to succeed. Humanity had reached for the stars and found them full of wonders, but also full of species who judged others by their own standards. The Zephyrians valued strength and courage above all else. Today, Jake would have to prove that humans possessed both. I'm ready, he said, raising his blade. The energy weapon hummed with power as he held it steady. Around the arena, the Zephyrian crowd fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the planet itself was waiting to see what would happen. Next, Valandra raised her own blade and moved into a fighting stance that looked both graceful and deadly. Her forearms gave her options that Jake couldn't match, but he had advantages too. Human reflexes, human determination, and 30 years of military training that had taught him to find ways to win even when the odds were against him. Begin! Shouted Elder War Chief Mortandus. The first test of humanity among the stars had begun. Valandra moved like water in the arena, her forearms flowing through combat forms that Jake had never seen before. The energy blade in her primary hand traced glowing patterns in the air, while her other three arms maintained perfect balance. Every movement was precise and beautiful, like a deadly dance that had been practiced for thousands of years. Jake kept his distance and watched carefully. His military training had taught him to study his opponent before making any aggressive moves. Valandra was showing off the traditional Zephyrian fighting style, but she was also testing him. She wanted to see how he would react to her superior reach and speed. The crowd of Zephyrians murmured approval as their war chiefess demonstrated the sacred forms. Jake could hear the excitement in their voices even though he couldn't understand their language. To them, this wasn't just a fight. It was a ceremony that would reveal the true nature of the strange humans who had come from across the galaxy. Do you see, human? Valandra called out as she spun her blade in a complex pattern. This is the way of our people. We have perfected the art of combat over 10,000 years. Each movement has meaning. Each strike has purpose. Jake nodded, but didn't respond. He was learning. The Zephyrian fighting style was based on tradition and honor, but it was also predictable. Every movement followed ancient patterns that had been passed down through generations. Beautiful, but rigid. Doctor. Lisa Carter watched from the VIP section with growing concern. She had studied Zephyrian culture for months, but seeing their combat rituals in person was different from reading about them in research files. The aliens around her were completely focused on the arena, their forearms moving slightly as they followed Valandra's demonstration. "She's playing with him," Amanda Torres whispered to Ryan Blake. "Look how she's moving." "She could have attacked already, but she's showing off first," Ryan nodded nervously. "Is that good or bad for the captain?" "With Jake, it's probably good. He's had time to study her fighting style." In the arena, Valandra finished her demonstration and faced Jake directly. "Now you will show us what humans can do. Attack me." Jake shook his head. "You first. I want to see how you really fight, not just how you practice." The war chiefess tilted her head, considering his words. In the crowd, several Zephyrians made sounds of surprise. It was unusual for the challenge to make demands of the challenger. "Interesting," Valandra said. "Very well." She attacked without warning, moving faster than Jake had expected. Her blade swept toward his chest in a precise arc designed to cut close to his heart. Jake jumped backward, but not quite fast enough. The energy blade sliced through his uniform and drew a thin line of blood across his chest. The cut burned like fire. Jake bit back a curse and looked down at the wound. It wasn't deep, but it was exactly where Valandra had aimed. The Zephyrian had perfect control of her weapon. "Feel that?" Valandra asked in broken English, her voice carrying clearly through the arena. She stood ready for his surrender, as she had seen from every other species that had been tested this way. Jake looked up at her and smiled grimly. "Yeah," he gritted through the pain. "You failed to hit my heart again. Now it's my turn." The entire arena fell silent. In the VIP section, Elder War Chief Mortandis leaned forward in his seat. Dr. Carter held her breath. Even Valandra stopped, moving for a moment, her forearms frozen in position. No species in Zephyrian history had continued fighting after the first blood drawing. The ritual cut near the heart was meant to test courage, but every other race had yielded immediately after receiving it. Pain was supposed to make the opponent surrender, not make them more determined. "You do not yield?" Valandra asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Not even close?" Jake replied. He wiped blood from his chest with his free hand and raised his energy blade. "My turn." Jake's attack was nothing like the graceful Zephyrian combat forms. He came straight at Valandra with brutal efficiency, using techniques he had learned in Earth's military conflicts. No ceremony, no traditional patterns, just direct, aggressive moves designed to end fights quickly. Valandra barely managed to block his first strike. Jake's blade crashed against hers with more force than she had expected from the smaller human. She tried to counter with a traditional response, but Jake was already moving, attacking from an angle that wasn't covered in any Zephyrian combat manual. The crowd gasped as their war chiefess was forced to give ground. Jake pressed his advantage, using his smaller size to get inside her longer reach. His blade work was crude compared to Zephyrian standards, but it was effective. Every strike was aimed at vital areas with no concern for style or honor. "This is not proper combat," one of the Zephyrian council members shouted. "Where is the ceremony? Where are the traditional forms?" Elder War Chief Mortandis silenced him with a gesture. "Let them fight. I want to see what this human can do." Jake managed to land a cut on Valandra's arm, drawing blue blood that glowed slightly in the arena's lighting. The war chiefess looked at her wound with surprise. In hundreds of ritual combats, few opponents had managed to mark her. "You fight like an animal," she said, but there was respect in her voice rather than insult. "I fight to win," Jake replied. "That's what humans do." They circled each other carefully now. Valandra had learned that traditional Zephyrian tactics weren't working against this strange opponent. Jake had proven that human unpredictability could overcome superior reach and speed. In the stands, Pete Collins nudged Sharon Davis, the team's medic. "Look at the aliens, they're confused." Sharon followed his gaze and saw that he was right. The Zephyrians in the crowd were talking among themselves in agitated voices. Some pointed at Jake, others at Valandra. They had never seen anything like this human's fighting style. Dr. Carter was taking detailed notes on her tablet. This is remarkable, she whispered to Amanda Torres. Jake is showing them something completely outside their experience. They built their entire culture around formal combat. The humans learned to fight for survival. The captain's using everything, Amanda agreed. Street fighting, military tactics, even some moves I recognize from his boxing days back on Earth. Valandra attacked again, this time abandoning some of her traditional forms in favor of more practical strikes. She was learning to adapt, but Jake had been adapting his entire life. Human warfare had always been about improvisation and using whatever worked. Jake caught her blade on his and twisted, trying to disarm her. Valandra used her extra arms to maintain her grip, but the move surprised her. No Zephyrian would have attempted such a dishonorable technique. "Why do you fight this way?" she asked during a brief pause in their combat. "Where is your honor?" Jake wiped sweat and blood from his face. The cut on his chest was still bleeding, but he ignored the pain. "My honor is in representing my people well. Humans don't have fancy fighting traditions, we have survival." "Survival?" Valandra repeated the word slowly, as if tasting it. "Every human alive today is descended from survivors," Jake continued, keeping his blade ready. "We survived ice ages that killed most life on our planet. We survived diseases that should have wiped us out. We survived wars that lasted for years. We don't fight pretty, we fight to live." The war chiefess considered his words while the crowd waited in tense silence. Around the arena, thousands of blue faces watched the small human who refused to follow their rules but somehow commanded their attention. "Show me more of this survival," Valandra said finally. She came at him again, but this time she mixed traditional Zephyrian techniques with some of the brutal efficiency she had seen from Jake. The combination was deadly, and Jake found himself working harder to avoid her attacks, but something had changed in the arena. The crowd's confusion was turning into fascination. The Zephyrian Council members were leaning forward in their seats, studying every move Jake made. They had never seen a species fight the way humans fought. Elder War Chief Mortandus spoke quietly to his advisors. "This human shows us something new. His people do not fight for glory or tradition. They fight because they must. There is a difference." Jake and Valandra continued their deadly dance in the center of the arena, but both fighters sensed that something important was happening. This was no longer just a test of human courage. It was becoming a lesson about what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. The real fight was just beginning. Jake's breathing was getting heavier, but his grip on the energy blade remained steady. The cut across his chest burned with every movement, but he had learned long ago to use pain as fuel instead of letting it slow him down. Military training on Earth had taught him that the body could endure far more than the mind believed possible. Valandra pressed her attack with renewed intensity. Her forearms moved in complex patterns as she tried to overwhelm Jake with traditional Zephyrian blade work. She was faster and stronger, but Jake had something she didn't expect. He kept fighting when any reasonable person would have given up. The war chiefess managed to land another cut, this one across Jake's left shoulder. Blue energy seared through his uniform and into his flesh. Jake stumbled but didn't fall. Instead, he used his momentum to spin away from her follow-up attack and came back with a strike of his own. "Feel that?" Valandra asked again, using the ritual words. Blood was flowing down Jake's arm now, mixing with the blood from his chest wound. Jake looked at his shoulder and then back at her. "Yeah, I feel it. Hurts like hell." He shifted his grip on his blade, accommodating the injured arm. "But I'm still here." In the VIP section, Dr. Lisa Carter was frantically taking notes while watching the fight. She understood what was happening better than anyone else on the human team. "This is incredible," she whispered to Ryan Blake. "Jake is demonstrating something the Zephyrians have never seen before." "What do you mean?" Ryan asked, wincing as Jake took another hit. "Pain tolerance. Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day for millions of years. Ice ages. Predators, diseases, natural disasters. We learned to keep going when injured because stopping meant death. Amanda Torres was watching the fight with professional interest. The captain's using the blood, she observed quietly. Pete Collins looked confused. Using it how? Look at his hands. The blood is making his grip unpredictable. She can't tell exactly how he's holding his weapon anymore. And watch his footwork. He's letting the blood drip to make the arena floor slippery in places only he knows about. Sharon Davis, the team medic, was torn between admiration and concern. Those wounds need treatment, but he's turning them into tactical advantages. I've never seen anything like it. In the arena, Jake was doing exactly what Amanda had noticed. Every time Valandra drew blood, he found a way to use it. The cut on his chest made his shirt stick to his skin in ways that confused her targeting. The shoulder wound changed how he moved his arm, making his attacks harder to predict. But more than that, each injury seemed to make Jake more determined rather than weaker. This was completely outside Zephryon experience. In their culture, pain was supposed to teach wisdom and encourage surrender. Warriors who took too much damage were expected to yield before permanent harm occurred. Valandra landed a third cut, this one across Jake's right thigh. The human's leg buckled slightly, but he used the stumble to get under her guard and score a hit on her side. Blue blood flowed from the wound, and the crowd gasped. You are injured, Valandra pointed out. Breathing hard herself now. Why do you not yield? Your body tells you to stop. Jake wiped blood from his face and smiled grimly. My body's been telling me to stop doing things my whole life. When I was 12, I broke my leg falling out of a tree, kept climbing trees. When I was 20, I got shot in a war zone, kept fighting. When I was 30, I got food poisoning that nearly killed me, kept eating. He raised his blade again. Humans don't listen to our bodies when there's something important to do, the war chiefess stared at him. This is madness. This is humanity. Elder War Chief Mortandus was having a quiet but intense discussion with his council members. The old Zephryon had seen many species tested in this arena, but never anything like the human captain. He should have yielded after the first cut, one advisor whispered. Every species yields after the first cut. It is natural. But he has not, Mortandus replied thoughtfully. And look at him. Each wound makes him more dangerous, not less. How is this possible? Another council member leaned forward. War Chief, I have studied the human files. Their planet is classified as a death world by galactic standards. Too much. Gravity, violent weather, dangerous predators, unstable geology. Most species could not survive there. And yet they not only survived, they thrived, Mortandus observed. Perhaps we are seeing why. In the arena, Jake was changing his fighting style again. The wounds were affecting his mobility, so he was adapting. Instead of trying to match Valandra's speed, he was using the arena itself. He kicked sand into her eyes, used the stone walls to ricochet his attacks, and even threw his own blood to distract her at crucial moments. This is not honorable combat, shouted a Zephryon in the crowd, but Elder War Chief Mortandus stood up. Silence! This human shows us something we have forgotten. Combat is not about honor, it is about survival. He fights as his species learned to fight when survival was not guaranteed. Valandra was beginning to understand what the elder meant. Every time she wounded Jake, he found a new way to use the injury against her. When she cut his sword arm, he learned to fight left-handed. When she damaged his leg, he turned his limp into an unpredictable fighting stance. But more than his adaptability, there was something else. Something that made the Zephryon crowds fall silent when they saw it. Jake's eyes never showed defeat. Pain, yes, fatigue, certainly. But not the acceptance of loss that they had seen in every other species. Why? Valandra asked during a brief pause in their fighting. Why do you continue? You are bleeding? You are injured? Your people will understand. If you surrender... Jake looked up at the human section of the arena, where his crew was watching with tense faces. Then he looked back at the thousands of Zephryon spectators who had come to watch him fail. Because giving up isn't what humans do, he said simply. Earth is a hard world. Humans who gave up when things got difficult didn't survive to have children. The ones who did survive were the ones who kept going no matter what happened to them. He gestured to his wounds with his free hand. These cuts hurt, but they're not going to kill me. I've had worse injuries and kept fighting. My great-grandfather fought in a war for 4 years with a piece of metal in his chest. My grandmother raised 6 children during a famine that lasted 3 years. My father worked in coal mines that collapsed twice while he was inside them. Jake raised his blade again. Humans don't quit because things are hard. We quit when we're dead. The arena was completely silent now. Even Valandra had stopped moving to listen to his words. The concept he was describing was foreign to Zephyrian thinking. They valued courage and strength, but they also valued wisdom and knowing when to stop. But Jake was describing something different. Not just courage, but a kind of stubborn refusal to accept defeat that went beyond rational thought. It was a species-wide trait that had been forged by millions of years of surviving on a world that didn't want them to live. Dr. Carter was writing as fast as she could on her tablet. This was the most important xenological observation in human history. He's showing them our evolutionary psychology, she whispered to herself. The mindset that got us through every extinction event our planet threw at us. Valandra resumed her attack, but something had changed in her movements. She was no longer trying to force Jake to surrender through pain. She was testing something else now. She wanted to see how far human endurance could really go. Jake met her renewed assault with grim determination. His body was telling him to stop, to rest, to tend his wounds. But 40,000 years of human evolution were telling him something else entirely. Keep fighting, survive, endure. The real test was just beginning. Valandra was breathing heavily now, something that surprised both her and the watching crowd. In all her years as war chiefess, no opponent had pushed her to the point of exhaustion. A human captain was covered in wounds and should have collapsed by now. But instead he seemed to be getting more dangerous with each passing minute. Jake's fighting style had evolved throughout the battle. What started as military combat techniques had become something entirely new. He was creating his own combat forms in real time, adapting to every injury and using every disadvantage as a weapon. His movements were no longer pretty or traditional, but they were becoming increasingly effective. The cut on his chest had stopped bleeding, forming a rough scab that pulled tight when he moved. Jake used that sensation to time his attacks, letting the pain tell him exactly when to strike. The shoulder wound had changed how he held his blade, creating angles that Valandra couldn't predict. The leg injury made him favor one side, but he used that as a feint to draw her attacks where he wanted them. Impossible, whispered one of the Zephyrian council members. He grows stronger as he becomes weaker. How is this happening? Elder War Chief Mortandus watched the fight with growing fascination. I begin to understand. This human does not fight despite his injuries. He fights because of them. Pain makes him focus. Wounds make him creative. Exhaustion makes him desperate, and desperation makes him unpredictable. In the human section, Chris Morgan, the navigation officer, was trying to understand what he was seeing. How is Jake still standing? Those cuts should have dropped him 20 minutes ago. Kelly Foster, the pilot, had served in Earth Space Marines before joining the diplomatic mission. It's not about the cuts, she said quietly. Look at his eyes. Jake's not fighting Valandra anymore. He's fighting every challenge humanity has ever faced. Every extinction event, every war, every disaster that should have killed us but didn't. Dr. Carter looked up from her notes. Kelly's right. Jake has entered what we might call a species memory state. He's not just drawing on his own training and experience. He's accessing the survival instincts that kept humanity alive for millions of years. In the arena, Jake was proving her point. He had stopped thinking about proper combat techniques or even winning the fight. His mind had narrowed to a single simple goal: don't stop. Whatever happens, don't stop. It was the same mental state that had carried humans through ice ages, plagues, and countless other disasters. Valandra launched a complex four-armed attack that should have been impossible to counter. Jake couldn't match her speed or reach, but he didn't try to. Instead, he did something no Zephyrian warrior would ever consider. He stepped into her attack, accepting a fourth wound across his ribs in order to get close enough to strike back. The crowd gasped as Jake's blade found its mark, cutting deep into the war chiefess's primary sword arm. Blue blood flowed freely, and for the first time in the fight, Valandra showed real pain on her face. "You are insane," she said, looking at her wounded arm. "You let me cut you to get that strike." Jake wiped blood from his mouth and smiled. "Humans call that a fair trade. I can handle one more cut if it means getting past your guard. But you could have been killed." "Could have been, wasn't? That's the difference between could and did." Tony. Rodriguez, the engineering chief, was watching from the stands with amazement. He's treating the fight like an engineering problem. Every solution has a cost, but as long as the benefit is greater than the cost, it's worth doing. Beth Sanders, the communications specialist, nodded. "That's very human thinking. We've always been willing to pay a price to get what we need." Valandra was discovering that her wounded arm affected her fighting more than all of Jake's injuries. Seemed to affect him. Zephyrian combat forms required precise coordination between all four limbs. With one arm damaged, her traditional techniques became clumsy and ineffective. Jake pressed his advantage relentlessly. He had learned her patterns over the course of the fight, and now he was exploiting them. Every time she tried to use a classic Zephyrian attack sequence, he was already moving to counter it. His unpredictable human tactics were becoming even more effective as she became predictable. "This is not how combat is supposed to work," Valandra said, frustration clear in her voice. "You should be weakening. I should be gaining advantage. As the fight continues?" "Maybe that's how it works for other species," Jake replied, landing another cut on her secondary arm. "But humans get more dangerous when we're cornered. It's how we survived when everything else on our planet was trying to eat us." The war chiefess was learning a hard lesson about human psychology. Fear, pain, and exhaustion didn't make humans surrender. They made humans fight harder. The worse things got, the more creative and desperate human tactics became. Elder War Chief Mortandus was having an intense discussion with his advisors. "Do you see what we are witnessing?" he asked them. "This human has turned our entire understanding of combat upside down. He uses weakness as strength, injury as opportunity, pain as motivation." One advisor looked troubled. "War Chief, if this is how humans fight, what does that say about their species? Are they dangerous to the galaxy?" Mortandus considered the question carefully. "No, I do not think they are dangerous in the way you mean. They do not fight from cruelty or aggression. They fight from necessity. This human could have hurt Valandra much worse by now, but he shows restraint. He takes only the wounds he needs to give to win. In the arena, the tide of battle had clearly turned. Valandra was now the one bleeding from multiple wounds while Jake, despite his injuries, was controlling the pace of the fight. His endurance was proving superior to her initial advantages in speed and strength, but more than that, Jake was teaching the entire Zephyrian culture something new about the nature of warfare. Combat wasn't just about strength or skill or honor. It was about the will to continue when everything logical said you should stop. "Why do you not finish this?" Valandra asked during a brief pause. She was breathing hard and favoring her wounded arms. "You could have delivered a killing blow twice now, but you held back." Jake lowered his blade slightly. "Because killing you isn't the point. Proving that humans belong in the galaxy is the point. Dead enemies don't vote in the Galactic Federation." The war chiefess stared at him. "You fight with such intensity, but you show mercy?" Humans learned a long time ago that the best way to end a war is to turn your enemies into friends. Hard to do that if they're dead. This concept was as foreign to Zephyrian thinking as human endurance had been. Their culture valued honorable combat, but they had never considered the idea that the ultimate goal of fighting might be to stop fighting. Valandra raised her blade again, but her movements were slower now. Jake had worn her down through sheer persistence, turning what should have been her easy victory into a grinding battle of attrition. And attrition was a game humans had been playing for millions of years. "Show me more," she said quietly. Show me what else humans can do. Jake smiled grimly and raised his own blade. The fight wasn't over yet, but something fundamental had changed in the arena. The Zephyrian audience was no longer watching a ritual combat. They were witnessing the emergence of a new kind of warrior, one who redefined what it meant to be strong. The human way of fighting was about to become part of galactic knowledge, and the universe would never be quite the same. The final phase of the battle began with both fighters moving more carefully. Jake's wounds were taking their toll, but his spirit remained unbroken. Valandra, despite her superior training and natural advantages, found herself facing an opponent who simply refused to be defeated. Every technique in her arsenal had been tested against human stubbornness and found wanting. Jake's strategy had evolved one final time. He was no longer trying to match Valandra's speed or power. Instead, he was doing what humans had always done best. He was outlasting his opponent through sheer determination and clever adaptation to circumstances. The war chiefess made one last attempt to end the fight using traditional methods. She combined all four of her arms in a devastating attack pattern that had never failed to defeat an opponent. The energy blades moved like lightning, creating a web of deadly light that should have been impossible to escape, but Jake didn't try to escape. He did something that no Zephyrian would ever consider. He charged straight into the attack, accepting 2 more cuts across his arms while positioning himself for a final strike. His blade found its mark at Valandra's throat, stopping just short of causing serious harm. For a long moment, both fighters stood frozen. Jake's blade hummed with energy inches from Valandra's neck. Her own weapons were positioned to strike him, but they had both reached the same conclusion at the same time. The fight was over. I yield, Valandra said clearly. Her voice carrying across the silent arena. The crowd of Zephyrians erupted in confused chatter. In their entire recorded history, no challenger had ever forced their war chiefess to surrender. The humans in the VIP section were equally stunned, but for different reasons. They knew Jake had won, but they also knew the cost. Jake stepped back and deactivated his energy blade. Blood was flowing from 6 wounds, and his legs were shaking with exhaustion. But his eyes were clear and alert, and when he looked up at the crowd, there was no defeat in his expression. Why? Valandra asked as she lowered her own weapons. Why did you not strike the killing blow? You had the opportunity. Jake wiped blood from his face and smiled tiredly. Because I told you already, the point isn't to kill you. The point is to show you what humans are capable of when we need to be. Elder War Chief Mortandus rose from his seat and walked down into the arena. The ancient Zephyrian leader moved with dignity and purpose, his 4 arms held in a position that indicated deep respect. Behind him, the other council members followed, their expressions showing a mixture of amazement and thoughtful consideration. Human. Captain Jake Morrison, Mortandus said formally, you have shown us something today that we have never seen before. In 10,000 years of testing other species, none have demonstrated what you have demonstrated. Jake tried to stand straighter, but his wounds and exhaustion made it difficult. What have I demonstrated, Elder War Chief? That strength is not always about power. That courage is not always about fearlessness. That victory is not always about defeating your opponent. The old Zephyrian's voice carried clearly through the arena. You have shown us that true warriors fight not because they enjoy battle, but because they refuse to accept defeat when something important is at stake. Dr. Lisa Carter was frantically taking notes from the VIP section. This was the most significant first contact event in human history, and she wanted to record every word. Around her, the rest of Jake's crew watched with pride and relief as their captain was recognized for what he had accomplished. Valandra approached Jake and offered him one of her energy blades. This is a Zephyrian honor blade, she explained. It is given only to warriors who have proven themselves worthy of our highest respect. In all our history, no member of another species has ever earned one. Jake accepted the blade with trembling hands. I'm honored, War Chiefess. You should be, she replied. But more than that, you should understand what this means. The Zephyrian people have made our decision about humanity. Elder War Chief Mortandus stepped forward again. The Zephyrian Council votes unanimously to support humanity's application to join the Galactic Federation. We will sponsor your species and speak for your worthiness to all who question it. The crowd of Zephyrians began a rhythmic chanting that started low and built to a thunderous roar. The human crew members looked around in amazement as thousands of alien voices joined together in what could only be a song of respect and welcome. "What are they chanting?" Ryan Blake asked Dr. Carter. "I think," she said, consulting her translation device, "they're singing about warriors who turn pain into strength and defeat into victory. It's a very old Zephyrian war song, but they're adapting it for Jake." In the arena, medical personnel from both species were tending to Jake's wounds. Sharon Davis worked alongside Zephyrian healers, sharing human medical knowledge while learning alien techniques. The cooperation between the two species had already begun. "Captain," Amanda Torres said as she helped support Jake's weight, "You did it? You got us into the Federation?" Jake looked around at the scene in the arena. Zephyrian warriors were approaching human crew members with curiosity and respect. Elder War Chief Mortandus was deep in conversation with Dr. Carter about human psychology and evolution. Valandra was examining the human medical equipment with fascination. "We all did it," Jake corrected. "This was a team effort from the beginning." Pete Collins and Tony Rodriguez were already discussing engineering concepts with their Zephyrian counterparts. The language barriers were being overcome through shared technical knowledge and mutual respect. Kelly Foster and Chris Morgan were fielding questions about human space, navigation techniques, but the most significant conversations were happening between Dr. Carter and the Zephyrian scientists. They wanted to understand how a species could evolve to use pain and adversity as sources of strength rather than weaknesses to be overcome. "Your species fascinates us," Valandra told Jake as the medics finished treating his wounds. "We have always believed that avoiding unnecessary pain was wisdom. But you have shown us that sometimes enduring necessary pain is a greater wisdom." "Humans learned that lesson a long time ago," Jake replied. "Our planet taught us that life is hard, but that doesn't mean it's not worth living. Sometimes the best things come from the worst situations." Elder War Chief Mortandus approached them with a formal document covered in Zephyrian writing. "This is our official endorsement of humanity for Federation membership. It states that humans possess the rarest quality in the galaxy, the ability to transform suffering into strength, defeat into determination, and obstacles into opportunities." Jake read the document through his translation device, understanding the magnitude of what had been accomplished. Humanity would take its place among the stars not as conquerors or supplicants, but as equals who had proven their worth through character rather than technology. 3 months later, Jake stood before the Galactic Federation Council on the space station that served as the galaxy's capital. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the great assembly hall, all of them curious about the humans who had impressed the legendary Zephyrian warriors. His crew stood with him as he addressed the assembled aliens. Dr. Carter's Xenobiological reports had been distributed throughout the galaxy, explaining human psychology and evolution to species who had never encountered anything like it. The Zephyrian endorsement had opened doors that might have remained closed for centuries. "Honored representatives," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "humanity comes before you not claiming to be the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced species in the galaxy. We come before you as survivors, as beings who have learned that the greatest victories often come from refusing to accept defeat." The vote for human membership in the Galactic Federation was unanimous. As Jake accepted the formal welcome on behalf of all humanity, he thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. From a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy to full membership in the greatest alliance of civilized worlds, humanity had found its place among the stars, not through conquest or superiority, but by proving that sometimes the greatest strength comes from simply refusing to give up. The human spirit, forged by millions of years of surviving on a hostile world, had become humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, The stars were waiting, and humanity was ready to meet them as equals.